In the pentagram rite was as if I was in a heaven surrounded by teal stars. In the first set of vibrations, I saw little bursts about of soft colors to the west and to the north. In the second, I saw them to the south and to the east. In the third, I saw the shadows pointing extra directions. In the fourth, faint blue lines outlined the shadows. In the fifth, starting at the height of the beam across the top of the door, there was a blackness that filled the room, and I could not see the ceiling. During the final reading, I felt movement around my head and around my feet, and I felt a heavy pressing down. In the final scrying, it was as if there was a teal tree. No leaves, no growth other than the trunk and branches could be seen, but it was huge. I felt a flowing in and out from my hands and feet and to my hands and feet as they touched the ground. And I felt pleasurably hypersensitive, and I still do to a degree. And the shadows united as the euphoria rushed down me. This book here seems to indicate one of the magical importances of self-education, of reading a lot, of consuming lectures and media and such of a varied variety, but connecting it into one's field theory. Because at the very least, in the middle of things, you can be associating the first two chapters. Get a person in line with a witch camp. And, I guess the thoughts that ran through her head, thinking back on it, during, before, maybe. This book mentions the relative percentage of people with red hair in the world. I mean, natural red hair. I personally have sort of an aversion to fake redheads. I interact with fake redheads, but, I something about it just, what's attractive tends to be rather relative, and part of what's relative is what's put through the media. So certain cultures have, beyond their percentage, dominance over the media. So therefore, those cultures or those families or whatever, they'll be presented as more attractive or whatever that they want to put across. Certain biblical figures are certain figures that are implied by the Bible. Well, they are implied as redheads by tradition, and part of that's the whole Roman thing, because Romans would wear red wigs to depict themselves as slaves or captured enemies or something, because they had to fight some people to the north, like the Celts and the Norse, where red hair was more common. Much like reference to golden-haired animals, red hair also plays an important part in myth, but we're talking about humans here, so I understand why that per se wouldn't be included so much. I think red hair comes from our descent from Homo erectus in the Eurasian steppes. Elsewhere, there is indication that red hair would be an indication of larger brain size, increased sensitivity, but other than that, as far as input sensually, but other than that, the myths about the sexuality of red hair, it doesn't really match up, and overall I think, things come out to be about the same. Just like blonde hair, the darker people, conditions like being albino and stuff, it would be more common for them to have red in their hair. And a lot of the stories of red hair has more to do with the fact that it's an anomaly than anything else. Thor, just like Odin, made its way into the association of Satan from a Western view, and particularly Thor was thought of as a redhead, Set was thought of as a redhead. Certain ideas about deities and stuff like that as redheads kind of indicated the ideal thing. Well, if the Norse went down, and then you have the conquering of the Austrian German people, whether you call them the Celts or whether you call them some other group, that had its effect in the association with the red hair and blonde hair for that matter. Same thing with the since that hair color had made its way back towards Kiev and stuff, you also had, stories about blondes and red-haired people and stuff with the, let's just call them Russian. Although this really started as a tribe or two of the 75 Slavic tribes, and then they kind of spread back and forth and back and forth. Some things just appear out of prejudice. You know what I mean? People think of one figure that had red hair, or another figure that had some red hair, and, they extend things from there. So-called paganism, certainly the rural people would have different ideas than the city people. But that doesn't mean either one's necessarily completely reliable or completely knowledgeable. Old stories used the mention of color and some other things as a way of getting a message across. Change, staying the same, association with things that aren't necessarily relevant.